The hospital room was eerily silent except for the steady beep of the heart monitor. A frail little girl, no older than 8, lay motionless on the bed, her face pale, her breath shallow. The doctors had done everything they could. The medicines weren't working, the treatments had failed, and the hope in her mother's eyes had begun to fade. It was only a matter of time now. Nurses whispered in hushed voices, avoiding eye contact with the grieving family. But amid the overwhelming sorrow, there was one soul who refused to give up: Max, the family's loyal golden retriever. Max had been by the girl's side since the day she was born. He had watched her take her first steps, had played with her for hours, and had slept beside her every night. But now she wasn't waking up, and Max sensed something was terribly wrong. He whined softly, his large brown eyes fixed on the girl's lifeless face. No one paid attention to him. They were too lost in their grief. But Max wasn't just any dog. He knew his little human needed him. Then suddenly, something changed. Max sprang onto the bed, ignoring the gasps from the nurses. He nuzzled the girl's hand, licked her face, and let out a deep, sorrowful howl. First, nothing happened. But then her fingers twitched. A weak breath hitched in her throat. Her mother's eyes widened. The doctors rushed to the bedside in disbelief. Against all odds, something was happening. Something even medicine had failed to do. What had Max done? How was this even possible? The answer would leave everyone speechless. The hospital room felt colder than usual, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The dim fluorescent lights flickered slightly, casting long shadows across the sterile white tiles. Outside, the sky had turned a murky gray, thunder rumbling in the distance, mirroring the storm of emotions inside the room. The air was thick with despair, and the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor sounded almost like a countdown, each passing second stealing more hope. The doctors whispered in hushed tones, exchanging glances that said what they didn't dare speak aloud. The girl's mother sat frozen beside the bed, her fingers trembling as she stroked her daughter's motionless hand. She could feel the warmth slowly slipping away. Her little girl, her world, was fading, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself not to break. And then there was Max. The golden retriever lay curled up beside the hospital bed, ears perked, eyes flicking between the girl and the doctors. His body was tense, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. He whimpered, nudging the girl's fingers with his wet nose, but there was no response. His tail, once always wagging, was still. The silence was unbearable, pressed down like a heavy weight, suffocating, relentless. Max let out a low whine, his heart pounding. He didn't understand medical terms, didn't know what a diagnosis meant, but he could feel it. The darkness creeping closer, threatening to take away the one person he loved most. And then, in the suffocating quiet, something stirred. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but Max noticed, and in that moment, everything changed. Lena had always been a fighter. At just 10 years old, she had faced more battles than most people would in a lifetime. She was born with a rare heart condition, one that had left her childhood filled with hospital visits, endless tests, and medications that only seemed to delay the inevitable. Despite it all, she remained the bright, cheerful girl everyone adored. Until recently, the disease had taken its toll, leaving her weak, barely able to lift her head. The spark in her once vibrant green eyes had dimmed, and the doctors had started preparing her mother for the worst. Her mother, Rachel, had refused to accept it. A single mother, she had fought for Lena from the moment she was born, sacrificing everything to give her the best care. She had spent countless nights by Lena's bedside, whispering stories of the adventures they would go on once she got better. But now, those stories felt like empty promises. Then there was Max. The golden retriever had been Lena's shadow since she was 5. He wasn't just a pet. He was her protector, her best friend. Max had an uncanny ability to sense when Lena was in pain. When her breathing became strained, he would rush to her side, pressing his body against her as if willing his strength into her frail frame. When she cried at night, he would nuzzle into her arms, licking away her tears. He never left her side, not for a second. Rachel had always believed that Max was special. There were moments when it seemed like he understood far more than he should, responding to Lena's unspoken emotions as if he could hear the words she never said. But now, as Lena's condition worsened, Max had grown restless. He paced around the hospital bed, ears flicking at every sound, eyes darting between Rachel and the doctors. Lena, too weak to speak, reached out a trembling hand and placed it on Max's head. He instantly stilled, pressing his wet nose against her palm. A weak smile played at the corners of her lips, her first in days. Rachel swallowed the lump in her throat, watching the silent exchange between her daughter and the dog who loved her more than life itself. The doctors had done everything they could. The medicine wasn't working. The machines keeping Lena stable were only delaying the inevitable. The nurse had even gently suggested that Rachel prepare to say goodbye. But Max refused to accept that. He could feel it. Something wasn't right. And as he stared into Lena's half-lidded eyes, something inside him snapped. The doctors might have given up. The medicine might have failed. But Max was about to do something no one could have ever predicted. Max's body tensed, his golden fur bristling as he sensed the change in the air. Something was wrong. He could feel it deep within his bones. A primal instinct screaming at him that Lena was slipping away. Her breathing had become shallow, her fingers barely able to curl around his fur. The steady beep of the heart monitor had slowed, each sound stretching longer between intervals. The doctors and nurses moved quickly, adjusting her checking her vitals, whispering to one another in hushed tones that sent a wave of panic crashing over Rachel. "She's not responding," one of the doctors murmured, his eyes grim. "Her pulse is weakening." Rachel clutched her daughter's limp hand, tears blurring her vision. "Lena, baby, stay with me," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "You're going to be okay. Just hold on." But Lena didn't respond. Her body was there, but her spirit, her warmth, was fading. Max whined loudly, pawing at the bed. His sharp brown eyes darted between Rachel and Lena, his instincts screaming at him to do something. Anything. He jumped onto the hospital bed, ignoring the startled gasps from the nurses. His front paws landed gently beside Lena, his face mere inches from hers. He licked her cheek desperately, nudging her with his nose. And then, something happened. Lena's fingers twitched. It was barely noticeable, but Max felt it. A spark. He barked frantically, trying to wake her, trying to call her back. The nurses exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering in their expressions. "Maybe we should," one of them started, but Rachel cut her off. "Let him stay," she whispered, her voice filled with a strange kind of hope. Max whined again, nudging Lena harder. He licked her hand, her face, anything to get a response. And then, he did something he had never done before. Something Rachel had never seen in all the years she had known him. He howled. It wasn't a normal howl. It was deep, filled with an almost mournful intensity that sent shivers down everyone's spine. It wasn't just a sound. It was a plea, a call that seemed to reach beyond the hospital walls. And that was when it happened. Lena's eyes fluttered. Her lips parted slightly, and the faintest whisper escaped. "Max?" Rachel gasped. The doctors froze. She spoke. One of the nurses murmured in disbelief. Max barked excitedly, his tail wagging, but he didn't move away. He stayed pressed against Lena, his warmth surrounding her. Her breathing, once slow and labored, started to steady. Her fingers curled weakly into Max's fur, holding on as if he was the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. The heart monitor, which had been slowing, began to pick up. The room, which had been filled with hopeless silence, now buzzed with urgency. "Her vitals are stabilizing," a doctor said in disbelief, checking the monitors again. This shouldn't be possible." Rachel let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding, her grip tightening on Lena's hand. "Baby, can you hear me?" Lena's lips moved again, barely forming words, but her fingers in Max's fur tightened ever so slightly. Max refused to leave her side. He curled up beside her, his body pressed against her weak frame, his steady breathing matching hers. The warmth of his presence, the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, seemed to anchor Lena to reality. Hours passed. Doctors continued monitoring her, whispering in stunned disbelief about the sudden change. She should have been getting worse, but instead, her stats were improving. Rachel, exhausted but unable to look away from her daughter, ran a hand over Max's fur. "You knew," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You knew she wasn't gone." Max's ears flicked, and he let out a quiet, reassuring huff before resting his head on Lena's lap. For the first time in weeks, hope filled the room. But what had truly happened? Had Max sensed something the doctors couldn't? Had his presence, his unwavering love, done what even the strongest medicine had failed to do? No one could explain it. But one thing was clear: Lena was still here. And it was all because of him. Hours turned into days. Yet the strange events surrounding Lena's recovery only intensified. The doctors remained baffled. They had no medical explanation for what had happened, how a child so close to the brink had suddenly stabilized. It wasn't just improvement. It was something beyond their understanding. They ran test after test, yet each result only confirmed what they already knew. Lena was getting better, but they had no idea why. Rachel stayed by her daughter's bedside, watching every small movement, every flicker of her eyelids. Lena still hadn't spoken much, but she responded in small ways. A faint squeeze of Rachel's hand, the occasional shift of her head, and always Max remained beside her. He refused to leave the room, curling protectively at the foot of her bed, his sharp eyes never straying from Lena's fragile form. But there was something odd about Max now. Rachel had raised him since he was a pup, had seen every side of him, his playful, his protective, his gentle. But this was different. He was more alert, more intense, almost as if he were waiting. One night, as Rachel dozed off in the chair beside Lena's bed, she woke abruptly to the sound of Max growling. It was low, almost a rumble in his chest. At first, she thought he had heard something outside, but as she blinked herself awake, she realized his gaze wasn't on the door. It was fixed on Lena. Rachel's heart pounded. "Max," she whispered, reaching out to touch him. The dog's muscles were tense, his ears pinned back. His eyes, usually warm and full of life, now held something else, something unreadable. He wasn't growling at Lena, but at something around her. Then, for the first time since she had woken up, Lena stirred. Her breathing hitched, her fingers twitched, and then she gasped. A sharp, ragged breath, as if she had been holding it in for far too long. Her eyes shot open, wide and unfocused, staring straight ahead at the ceiling. Rachel leapt to her feet. "Lena? Baby?" Lena didn't respond. She just kept staring, her small body trembling. Max growled louder now, his entire frame rigid, his hackles raised. And then, Lena turned her head ever so slightly, just enough to look at Rachel. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "He was here." Rachel froze. Her throat tightened. "Who? Sweetheart?" Lena's gaze flickered toward the corner of the room, the one shrouded in shadows. "The man," she whispered. "He was standing right there." A chill ran down Rachel's spine. She turned her head slowly, eyes locking onto the darkened corner of the room. There was nothing there, but Max didn't stop growling. Rachel swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. "Lena, what man?" Lena blinked slowly, as if trying to remember, as if part of her was still stuck in whatever place she had been before waking up. "The one who told me to go with him." Rachel's blood ran cold. The hospital room, once filled with the quiet beeping of machines and the occasional murmur of nurses outside, now felt unbearably still. Rachel could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the ice spreading through her veins. Lena looked down at Max then, her small hand brushing his fur. "He didn't let me," she murmured. "Max wouldn't let me go." Max finally stopped growling, but his body remained tense. His tail didn't wag. He was still on high alert, his eyes locked onto the same shadowed corner where Lena had pointed. Rachel forced herself to breathe, her fingers tightening around Lena's frail hand. "Baby, you're safe now," she whispered. "You're here with me." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure she believed it. Because the way Max watched the darkness, the way Lena clung to him like a lifeline, told her one thing: whoever had been there wasn't entirely gone. The room felt colder than before, as if the very air had thickened with something unseen. Rachel held Lena's hand tightly, her pulse racing. She wanted to believe it was just a dream, a side effect of her daughter's long illness. But the look in Lena's eyes, the raw, unfiltered fear, made it impossible to dismiss. Max still hadn't relaxed. He sat at the edge of the bed, ears pinned back, eyes locked on that darkened corner. His body was tense, coiled like a spring ready to snap. He wasn't just staring. He was guarding. Rachel's breath came out shaky. "Lena, what did the man say to you?" Lena swallowed hard. Her little fingers trembled as they gripped Max's fur. "He said I was supposed to go with him," she whispered. "He told me I didn't belong here anymore." Rachel felt her stomach drop. She knelt beside her daughter's bed, brushing strands of hair away from Lena's pale face. "But you didn't go." Lena shook her head. Her voice was barely audible. "Max wouldn't let me. He barked and barked. And then the man got angry. He said he would come back for me." Rachel's breath caught. A sharp chill prickled along the back of her neck. And then, Max lunged. A deep, guttural snarl ripped through the quiet hospital room as the dog sprang from the bed, teeth bared. His body crashed into thin air, yet his growl didn't waver. It was as if he had locked onto something invisible, something only he could see. Lena gasped, curling into Rachel's arms. "Mommy!" Rachel couldn't move. Her eyes darted to the corner of the room, to the spot Max was now viciously attacking. The shadows there seemed wrong. They didn't shift like normal darkness should. It was as if they pulsed, swirling in response to Max's aggression. And then, something changed. A deep, bone-chilling creak echoed through the room, the sound of weight pressing against the floor. The air grew heavier, the light dimmer. A pressure built in Rachel's chest, thick and suffocating. She could feel it now, the presence. Whatever Max was fighting, it was still here. Rachel's instincts kicked in. She scooped Lena into her arms, backing toward the door. "Max, come," she commanded, her voice firmer than she felt. But Max didn't move. His growls turned savage, his teeth snapping at something unseen. Then, all at once, the machines in the room flickered. Lena's heart monitor let out a long, eerie beep, a noise that sent terror shooting through Rachel's veins. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed violently before shutting off, plunging the room into near darkness. And then silence. Not the comforting kind, but an unnatural, suffocating stillness. Then a whisper, a breathy, guttural voice, just above a murmur. "She is mine." Rachel's heart pounded. No, she wouldn't accept this. She tightened her grip on Lena, stepping backward until she hit the door. "No," she said fiercely. "She is not yours." Max let out a feral snarl. Then, everything happened at once. The overhead light burst back on with a flickering flash. Max lunged again, snapping his jaws in a way Rachel had never seen before. The room filled with a deafening sound, an inhuman shriek, high-pitched and furious. The shadows pulsed once, twice, and then they vanished. Just like that, the air cleared. The weight lifted. The beeping of Lena's heart monitor returned to normal. The room was just a hospital room again. Max stood panting, his fur bristling, his stance still defensive. But the fight was over. Rachel let out a shuddering breath. She looked down at Lena, who was staring at Max, wide-eyed. "He made it go away," Lena whispered. Rachel pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart. He did." Max turned to face them, his tail wagging weakly. He climbed onto the bed beside Lena, pressing himself against her. He had done what no medicine could. He had fought for her, protected her from something no one else could see. Rachel ran a shaking hand over Max's head. "You saved her," she whispered. Max licked Lena's hand gently, as if reassuring her that she was safe now. And she was, for now. But deep in her gut, Rachel knew this wasn't over. The presence had been real, tangible. It had wanted Lena, and things that wanted never stopped wanting. But as long as Max was by her side, Rachel knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't let it take her. Not now. Not ever. Rachel sat beside Lena's hospital bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her daughter's chest. The rhythmic beeping of the monitors was no longer a sound of fear. It was a reassurance that she was still here, still fighting. The room, once thick with an unseen presence, now felt lighter. But Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed forever. She reached down, running her fingers through Max's fur. He lay curled at Lena's side, his body a protective barrier even in sleep. He had done what no doctor, no medicine, no amount of hope had been able to do. He had stood between Lena and something dark, something Rachel would never fully understand. What was it that had come for her daughter? A ghost? A shadow? A force that preyed on the weak? She may never have an answer, but she knew one thing. Lena had survived because of Max, because of his loyalty, his love, and his refusal to let her go. It made Rachel think about the unseen forces in life, the ones that pull people into despair, that whisper doubt and fear into their ears. Maybe not everyone has a Max to protect them, but maybe, just maybe, love itself is a shield, a force stronger than anything lurking in the dark. She looked at Lena, brushing a strand of hair from her face. For the first time in a long time, there was color in her cheeks, warmth in her skin. Maybe it was a coincidence. Or maybe Max had fought off more than just a shadow that night. Rachel exhaled, whispering, "Thank you." Max's tail wagged slightly in his sleep, as if he already knew. Because some bonds go beyond this world. If this story sent chills down your spine, imagine what else lurks in the unseen corners of our world. Do you believe in the unbreakable bond between humans and their pets? Or was there something more sinister at play that night? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love eerie, suspenseful tales that keep you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another spine-tingling story. There are more mysteries to uncover, more shadows to chase, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Stay curious, stay cautious, and we'll see you in the next story.